Welcome. This is our first video in the Queens Gambit Declined series. We're going to be talking about the old main line today with Bishop G5. But first, I'd like to focus on a number of different transpositions that Black can play. Let's go ahead and look at the board from Black's perspective. Now, typically when we think about the Queen's Gambit, it's going to start with D4, D5, and we're going to get this type of structure with Black, and this is basically the general skeleton of Black structure with the bishop on E7, knight on F6. We're going to discuss all of the major variations, but as I was stating, we're going to look at how in this game in 2008 between Magnus Carlsen and Veselin Topalov, he chooses Topalov a different move order to get to the Queen's Gambit. And he starts with one knight f6. Now, this is very viable for your opening repertoire. You just need to be aware that there are a lot of different openings that White can choose from that you need to be prepared for if you're going to play one knight f6, which I like one knight f6 better because you can conceal what opening you're trying to play and it gives you more options for growth and development in the future. So say for instance you have to be prepared for the Trompowsky. That's an opening. You won't be able to get a Queen's Gambit from here. For instance, if you play D5, he'll take and be at a solid position. White's gotten what he wants here. You have the bishop pair, but he's going to play against the double pawns for the rest of the game. That's one example. You can look up the games of Tviakov to see how to successfully play this opening. So after knight f6, we saw c4 in the main game, and then e6, and you gradually see how at this point he could play d5 at some point. Now, here is where there are a few different options for Black in the position. Say for instance if he plays knight c3. If you wanted to add the Nimzo Indian to your repertoire, you could play bishop b4 here. And after e6, if knight f3, say you're trying to avoid the Catalan, which we'll discuss later, you can play b6 or even bishop b4. Both moves, the Queen's Indian or Bogo Indian, are very viable choices. But in the main game, Topalov decides to go back into the Queen's Gambit with d5. After knight c3, you see that we're getting to our main position. And most of the time you'll see castles here, but Black decides to play h6. Now I want to focus in on the rare possibility. I would say it's seen maybe 1 in 8 games or so, where White actually takes here. And then we'll go back to the main line, which is keeping the tension with bishop h4. So basically, I found a very nice game in the database that Victor Balogun played with Black, and he's one of my favorite players. Like, if you have trouble remembering this line, the straightforward c6 to try to play for e5 is very fine. It gets adequate play for Black. But I like this very odd move, which is unnatural, knight c6, to put pressure on the center a different way. We don't have to support the center first. We can immediately start attacking. So he takes and then plays e5. And after d5, Black gets a comfortable game once he gets this f5 idea in, and he plays for a kingside attack. I'll go ahead and end that line there, because it's clear that Black has a sufficient position with his bishop pair. And let's return back to the main line with bishop h4, which we see in the Topalov game. Castles, e3, b6. Now, the focus of b6 is, of course, you have to get all of your pieces developed, and you need a good square for that bishop. So after b6, we have a good square. Now, again, this knight typically in these structures never goes to c6. That's why the previous line that I showed you was rare, and it had the point of playing e5. We don't want to play e5 in this position. We want to play c5, so the knight goes to d7. And now we have completed the opening phase and we're in the middle game phase. After bishop g3, we get in c5, and this is the typical starting point of the middle game in the Queen's Gambit structure. Takes, takes. Now, you can take with the e-pawn, and if you were to take with the e-pawn, this leaves the possibility of playing with hanging pawns. This is a difficult position to play. Typically, you'll play the queen to b6 and then e6, and black waits for the opportunity to push those pawns. If you push them too early or you push them too late, you'll end up in a worse position. The recent World Championship candidate, Sergei Karyakin, had some excellent games in the candidates tournament where he played with hanging pawns that I would suggest you take a look at if you're interested in this position. Otherwise, the position can typically be easy to play if they don't put you in the hanging pawns position. Let's say if he throws in a move like a3, we'll play c4 with the idea of a6, b5, and trying to make this pawn a pass pawn in the future. And you typically see this type of idea in the Queen's Indian defense. So that covers if e takes d5. Topalov had a specific idea with knight takes d5 in this game. So after takes, takes, white gets in e4, and after rook c1, he plays the move a6, just simply with the idea of getting some queenside space. Carlsen tries this move b4, and the more I looked at this move, the more I really don't like it. It's a pawn sack where you really just don't get enough. Probably best was rook e1, and after b5, d5. This at least creates an imbalance. White has the pass pawn, and then we get to this type of endgame where, in my opinion, this is equal. So going back to the main game with b4, takes, bishop c7, hitting the queen, queen e8, best move. He gives back the pawn in order to uncoil. And I can't stress it enough that when you're up a pawn, most of the time it's okay to give it back to get play. Remember Kasparov's 3 advantages: time, material, and quality. You've got material, but you had to give away time to get it. Notice bishop c7, your queen has to run to the corner, but then you're going to need 2 moves for the queen to make her successful again, as we saw. So he's given back the pawn in order to get that momentum back, to get the aggressive nature of the position back. So once we get to this position, it's clear white is lagging behind in development and all of his pieces are defensive, whereas most of black's pieces are aggressive, so black's position is slightly better here. After bishop d8, excellent move, forcing the bishop off the board. Now white has a very distinct problem in defending the d-pawn, because if he moves the knight to defend it, the e-pawn is going to be lost. And after any move by Carlsen, the pawn is lost, and Topalov eventually converts in the next 20 moves. So that ends our survey of the main line of the Queen's Gambit.